Hello.
And here we are. Good morning, Quinn.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. This is our first developer office hours. So thank you for joining. We already got some questions by email and from some other folks. So it should be a good time.
So I wanted to just bring up one thing, Quinn, is that it just struck me that office hours probably aren't the right thing for an all remote company or remote only company now. We might need a new name.
Yeah, that's right. That can be some homework from this office hours. All right. Well, I'm just going to jump in and start going through some of the questions that we got from folks. And after the first question, I'll pause and see what other people have. So just speak up, unmute yourself and speak up, or put something in chat if you got a question. All right. So let's see, I've got a bunch of questions. And first one I want to talk about is, how does our code intelligence work? How is it similar or different from what I get in my editor or what I get on GitHub's built-in code navigation and things like that? Want to just step back, and first, we always like to think of what problems are we solving with code intelligence. Some people think of code intelligence as just go to definition and find references. And that's useful. That's useful if you're in your editor, you're typing code. It's useful for some, basic questions when you're reading code, but there's a lot more. And one place to go to understand what more is there is looking at what Google has, and they've had for the last 10 years. If you are an engineer at Google, you're working on a massive code base, and most of your time is spent reading code and trying to go and fix code, not actually trying to write code. And so there's so much more that you need beyond just what your editor will show you, kind of local go to definition and find references. So when you're working on a large scale code base, when you are, as most developers are, spending most of your time reading and fixing code, you need a couple other things. One of them is you need things other than just that compiler level information. You need to know things like who owns this code, where is it running, is it throwing off a lot of errors right now, is it outside of our service level objectives for performance or errors or other things like that. You need to see that on the code as well. It's not just about the compiler information. And the second thing you need is you need to be able to use all of this understanding of the code structure and all that information to go and make fixes. So it's not good enough to just see the thing in some UI, but you need to write API tools against it to say go and fix all calls to this function that have this particular problem. So that's what we want to get to. And that is so far beyond what you get in your editor today. It's so far beyond what GitHub can give you, which is based on non-compiler information. It's based on tree sitter. So we want to get there, and it doesn't mean that what the editor has or what GitHub has is bad. It just means that it's not enough for developers who are working on, more than ever before, massive code bases, massive complexity with a ton more developers. So our vision for code intelligence in Sourcegraph is showing you all the information that can be known about your code. Take a line that's a method, show you where it's running, what errors is it logging, if you have feature flags, what groups of users are actually hitting this, show you all the change history, show you all the PRs that ever touched that, and of course show you all the other repositories, packages, and even calls to that particular method. And then show that to you in the UI, show that to you when you're reviewing code on your code review tool, show that in your code host in the same way, show that in your editor in the same way. And by the way, that means getting all that information like error and performance from runtime in your editor as well. But then also letting you run tools against all that information to make large scale refactors and fixes across all of your code. That's our vision for code intelligence. And we are working up to that. We've got awesome code intelligence for compiler information to see documentation, go to def, find references. And that works across all of your code hosts, all of your code review tools. You get the same little hover in your GitHub or GitLab code review that you would get on Sourcegraph. And we also support making large scale code changes. we're making that more advanced. We're making that, able to actually use this code intelligence information better. So we want to get you to, this holy grail where you have full understanding of everything that's going on in your code. All the information is in one place. All your tools are annotating the code in one place. And, all that data is available to you interactively and for making large scale refactors. So we have a lot of work to do. We are very lucky to have an awesome code intel team. One of the folks that recently joined Sourcegraph, he wrote a blog post about this, is the person who built this infrastructure internally at Google. So we are serious about this and we're investing a lot in this. Okay, that was an awesome first question. If anyone else has a question right now, speak up in the next few seconds or put it in chat. And if not, then I will go to one of the next questions from email. All right, I will go to one of the next questions from email, which is, we have a ton of repositories. Will Sourcegraph put too much load on our Bitbucket server and GitHub instance and take it down? All right, there's a good story behind this. In one of our very first customers, I won't name who, they had a code host that was already fairly, precarious. It was a self-hosted code host, and even just people using it and pushing and pulling sometimes would take it down. And someone set up Sourcegraph inside that company, and this was very early on, and it was over the weekends, and Sourcegraph spread so quickly, so many people were using it, and we hadn't done all these optimizations. We didn't know that code hosts were so precarious. And so that company's code host actually went down. And when people asked why, they said, well, we added Sourcegraph and a lot more people were using it, and it was causing more traffic on the code host. And everyone became aware of Sourcegraph in that company. It turns out that Sourcegraph was not the cause. This just happened all the time, but we were all so freaked out that we had taken down a code host. So we never wanted to make that happen again. That was like, things that keep me awake at night. It's Sourcegraph breaking one of our customers' code hosts. So we put a ton of work into thinking of every possible way that we can optimize how Sourcegraph fetches repos quickly without hitting API rate limits or without, causing any problems there. So we do a lot of things. We will have a pretty, fairly simple, but it works very well, an algorithm to understand what repos should we go and update. So we look at what repos are actually being changed and what repos are people actually browsing on Sourcegraph to know which ones do we need to more frequently update. And then we can test that and we can measure update latency across all repositories. And we have customers that measure this on their Grafana dashboards. And usually this number, even for very large companies with like 30,000 repos is, something under a minute. And in most cases, someone on the other side of the world can push something to a Git repo, and that'll be searchable and browsable on Sourcegraph in 5 to 15 seconds. So we put a lot of work into that. And it turns out once we did that, now we're at the point where inside of a lot of companies where they got some self-hosted code host, Sourcegraph is viewed as more stable than that code host. And so they'll just hammer the hell out of Sourcegraph with API requests, QPS of like 100 plus. So we feel proud about that. And we never want to take down a code host. As far as I'm aware, we have Sourcegraph traffic to a code host has not done that. All right. So I see a question in chat. I will take this. And if you have another question, then put it in. How do we plan to improve the Visual Studio Code extension? All right, good question. The Visual Studio Code extension right now and our other editor extensions are very simple. When you are editing a file in VS Code, you can do two things. You can run a search, and that's going to open up your browser and take you to the search results page, or you can go to that current file that's in your editor, but on Sourcegraph in your web browser. And this is useful, if you're coding and you say, I actually need to understand how this part of the code works, or find me usage examples. It's nice to be able to fork off your context and open a web browser, know that your editor is in that state, where you were in flow, and you can go back to that, but you can go answer your question somewhere else and come back to your editor and it's all there and you can get back in the flow. That's nice, but they're really basic. We've heard a few things that customers have asked for here. One is being the central brain for code intelligence at a company. So you join a company, you set up your editor, you point it at that internal Sourcegraph instance, and all of a sudden you get all code intelligence. Go to def, find references, it works across all repos, all this other info on your editor. Some other things we've heard are being able to search Sourcegraph from within the editor and use the editor's own search for that. So we are working on this. It's something I was, literally talking about with folks about an hour ago. How do we, hire more people to do this? As soon as, I would say, we'll have more of a plan and a roadmap that we can commit to in a few weeks. But for the person who asked this, Naval, how would you like us to improve the VS Code extension? That's what's most helpful. I'd love to hear that.
So I just installed Sourcegraph on a single repo, and it was mostly out of curiosity to explore what it can do. So I don't have like an answer for you there. Like I just wanted to contribute something on the open source side of your code base, and I thought I could probably do it on VS Code extension, and I thought it would be good to ask what you guys are planning on that front and maybe pick up something interesting. So I have some other ideas. I could probably mail them to you later.
Yeah, that'd be great. Or go post an issue.
Cool. So that's it. I just started using it, so I don't have any feedback.
Cool. Well, thanks for speaking up, and would love to see the ideas there. I did when in the first question, which was around how do we think of code intelligence? What are we doing there? We want to bring code intelligence to the editor. So that's the really big thing. That's where everyone working on a code base, everyone at a company gets, for no matter what editor they're using, all the go to def, find refs, all the code intelligence just works out of the box. It's really fast. It doesn't make your laptop fan go like crazy. And we're working up to that point. But in the meantime, there's a lot of smaller features we can add to make the editor extensions more useful for folks that frequently go to Sourcegraph and answer questions that come up in the dev workflow. Okay. I'll go to the next question from email, which is, how hard is it to set up and maintain Sourcegraph? All right. Oh, and I see another question in chat, which I'll get to after this. So how hard is it to set up and maintain Sourcegraph? We want to make it really easy. So, obviously I'm going to say that, but I will share my screen. So whoever is sharing this slide, can you please unshare? Thank you. All right. We make it very easy to set up Sourcegraph. And for those of you who've not seen this, this is where the vast majority of people that are using Sourcegraph started. They go to our website, go to our docs, and then this little Docker run command will let them run Sourcegraph on their own laptop. And because it's on your own laptop, all the code stays local. It's really fast to set up, and you can do this in less than 5 minutes. So that's the setup. It's very easy to set up Sourcegraph. Once you get to running this for thousands, tens of thousands of people in your organization with tons and tons of code, usually you're going to set it up with some kind of cluster on Kubernetes or Docker Compose, and we support all of that. We've got a lot of docs around how to do that. And there's definitely more work to be done there, but our principle is that we want you to treat Sourcegraph as you would treat an internal tool that you set up or an open source tool that you set up, where we just give you the Kubernetes YAML files. It's not some VM where you sign up on our website, you put in a license key or something. It's the way you deploy something in open source or internally. So you get those Kubernetes YAML files, and we have a strong incentive to make it easy, because if Sourcegraph is hard to set up, well then we have fewer customers and we have to deal with that support load. So we put a lot of work into making upgrades smooth and automatic. We put a lot of work into letting you monitor and track all the different metrics, performance metrics, and errors coming from the instance to troubleshoot things. So some of the numbers we have are there's a company with around 1,000 users a day, 1,000 employees at that company using Sourcegraph each day, and we know that the management overhead is about a quarter of one person or less. So that's very tiny. Think of that person's work and how much benefit they create for everyone else at the company. If someone is setting up Sourcegraph and they feel pain, we'd love to hear where that pain's coming from and how we can help. All right. Thanks for that. So yes. So Gareth, we are absolutely answering all kinds of questions. This is our first office hours and anything goes. So Gareth says, actually, Gareth, if you're on, do you want to just ask the question live?
Sure, as long as I can find my unmute button.
All right.
Yeah, so I read about your funding raise recently, which is pretty exciting. But I was also very kind of interested in how that affects your master plan and if you're feeling more pressure to head towards a sale, because obviously a lot of similar startups often get picked up by larger companies eventually. So is that part of the plan now, or do you have a long-term plan to remain independent?
Yeah, good question. I love this kind of question. We are independent. We want to remain independent, and there's a fundamental reason why it makes sense for us to be independent. So for those of you who don't know, Gareth is referring to two things. One is our master plan. I will show that real quick. This is just the high level of why did we start the company, where are we going, why this matters. And our vision is to prepare for a world where everyone is coding. And for now, the way we're doing that is by getting code intelligence to everyone. And you can see the rest of the details here. So we're working on this. This is something that's gotten a lot of folks excited. And another thing Gareth is referring to is we recently announced a $23 million Series B with Kraft and some other existing investors. And basically, are we sellouts? Is this money going to help us actually continue to execute on the master plan, or will this mean that we're going to jump into the arms of some big tech giant? We are going to remain independent, and here's why. Our product is universal code search, and that is really important. Inside of any company, code lives in so many different places. There's so many different other vendors and tools that developers use. So, take an example, 5,000 engineer company where they have some code on GitHub, some code on GitHub Enterprise, some on Bitbucket server. There's a team over there that's using GitLab. So code is scattered everywhere. They're using Datadog and Sentry and New Relic. They've got some internal tools to do code coverage. And Sourcegraph is the one place that developers go to answer questions that come from, they're not sure where it's from. They want to search for code, and they don't want to have to think, well, where does that code live? They just want one search box to go and answer their question. So Sourcegraph is that one place to find and fix code, and that's what universal code search is. So we naturally sit across all of these different vendors, and that's very different from if we were just a feature in one code host. If there's kind of a limit to how good any single code host could ever do what we're doing, because at a certain point, even if say GitHub were to make really good search, that's only going to solve problems for a fraction of the market, and that fraction of the market is defined as companies where all their code is solely on GitHub. Turns out that market is very fragmented, and so the set of companies whose code lives only on GitHub is fairly small. So there's naturally a kind of market force keeping us independent, because a lot of the reason why companies bring Sourcegraph in is because we are universal and we sit across all the different tools that they use. So we have that, and with our funding round, we absolutely love Kraft and David Sachs. David Sachs is a very well-known, very sharp product investor. He built some very quickly growing product businesses, and he's been a fantastic advisor to us. So by choosing to work with David Sachs instead of someone else, for example, that's, you know, a commitment on our side and on his side to, this is a product that every developer should be using, and let's get growth through the product, not by, you know, selling. And no VC wants to go invest a bunch of money into some company and then have that, you know, company go get acquired or something. So we have natural kind of market product forces keeping us independent. And we also have fantastic partners behind the company that believe in the master plan, that, you know, are investing in what we're doing, not in, you know, trying to put money in and then change our mind or anything like that. So we're lucky in that sense. Gareth, does that answer your question?
Yeah, thanks. That's great to hear.
Cool. And I will publicly commit to, if we do anything that, you know, is not in line with that, then I don't think we'll do that, but, you know, feel free to call me out. You can link to this part of the recording, you know, to show that I asked for that. All right, so I'll go back to questions from email. If anyone has other questions, then feel free to put them in Zoom chat or speak up. So can you show some structural search examples? I get the concept, but the syntax looks a little bit complicated. All right, cool question. I love this. Structural search is the idea that when you're searching for code, there's punctuation. So let me share my screen and I'll show, you know, some examples. So I go to Sourcegraph, and Sourcegraph is better than, you know, most code search tools in that we actually support regular expressions. So if you go to GitHub code search or, you know, other code search tools, you type in a parenthesis, you type in a dot, you type in a bracket, it's just going to ignore those. And that is really frustrating. We hear that from a lot of folks, and, you know, that's a reason why we started Sourcegraph. So Sourcegraph does support regex, and, you know, that means that you can, you know, search for, I'll search in the Sourcegraph repo and, you know, open. And if I do that, you know, this is gonna search. But let's say I want to search for some property of the argument. You know, I want to say, I want to find open calls that have, you know, only a single argument. How can I do that? It's actually really hard to express that in a regular expression, because programming languages in the computer science sense, they are not regular languages. They, you know, can be much more complex. And once you start getting to more complex queries, it just becomes totally impossible. So, you know, how do you write the regex for, you know, an open call with a single argument? You can do something simple like, you know, that, you know, that might work, but it's actually not correct because, well, it could split into multiple lines. You know, there could be a, for example, you know, a struct literal where there is a space, but it's still a single expression in the language. So that's a problem. And there's just so much overhead. And even among developers, if you look at surveys of, you know, do you know regular expressions? Do you feel confident writing them? Most developers say no. So we want to make universal code search. That means a code search that anyone can go to and just start typing in things and narrow down to what they need. So structural search is the solution to this. Think of it as a code-aware thing that's like regular expressions, but you know, actually understands the code syntax. So we have an awesome teammate named Renard, who actually, like another person who asked the previous question, is from South Africa. And Renard, he created something called Komi, which is a command line tool that you can run. And there's a nice website here, but, you know, basically it lets you find and replace things in code, but instead of using regular expressions, it lets you use these types of patterns. So if I would like, you know, here's my code file, and I want to match calls to this function that have, you know, arguments, I can put in a placeholder like that. That's called a hole. And from that, what Komi will do is it actually understands Go syntax. So this is not, you know, just matching a certain token. It's actually matching any valid Go expression that can fit in between those parentheses, which is really powerful. And frankly, if you're using regex to match or replace code, it's what you mean, but you just can't express in regex. So, you know, you can check out komi.dev for more info. But Sourcegraph actually supports this kind of syntax. And I'll show you how you can get to it and find some examples. Here's our search docs. You can just click the question mark next to search. And there's some examples here. So We are working on making this, part of the default search, but for now, you can just click that little button, and that will turn structural search on. And then you can put in these kinds of placeholders. And what you're seeing here is all calls to a function called new that have, any valid set of Go arguments. So it's matching string literals, it's matching, multiple arguments here. Any valid Go expression is going to be matched. So this is really powerful. You can see how it is, this is the way that everyone will be searching code once we make the UX really smooth. And also the opportunities for rewriting code are really powerful. For example, you can find common mistakes in your code fairly easily and rewrite them. One thing that we've seen is, let me search for it and then I'll show you. In Go, you can have a, unnecessarily complex code pattern where this func.sprintf returns a formatted string, and then you pass that to this fatal, which, crashes the program and prints an error out. And there's actually, a method called fatalf, but a lot of people don't realize that, and so this unnecessarily complex call. So right here, what I've done is I've said, find me all calls to fatal that have this inside of them. And I could do this in regex, but it's going to be painful. A lot of times this will be split over multiple lines. A lot of times, then when I want to replace the code, I need to make sure that it's only going to replace, the bit that I want. So, Sourcegraph, because it uses structural search, it lets you match this much more easily. And then the rewrite, you have confidence that it's going to rewrite it within the bounds of the language syntax and not, accidentally, take out the rest of the file because your regex had a bug or something like that. So that's structural search. We are working on making this just the default search experience in Sourcegraph. And if you want to start using it now, you can use it in Sourcegraph. You can also just go to komi.dev and download the CLI and use it locally. It's a really powerful tool. I think you will see it, replacing tools like grep and acgrep locally, and you'll hear a lot more programmers talking about structural search as opposed to regex. Any questions about structural search? Just put them in the Zoom chat. And also, Ryan put in a blog post with more examples. If there are any other questions that people have, then put them in Zoom chat, and I'll wait a couple seconds if anyone would like to do that or speak up. And then I will go to the next question from email if not. While I get a quick water break. All right, so next question from email. What does our front end and back end stack look like? So I'll pass that off to Byong, my co-founder and CTO.
Yeah, I'll just note that all of Sourcegraph code is public and open source. So if you're interested in diving more into this, you can go to sourcegraph.com and search for Sourcegraph. But a quick overview, our front end is TypeScript. Our back end is mostly Go, although we do use a variety of other languages for kind of language specific analysis. So there's some TypeScript on the back end as well, some Rust, and various other languages. And then at the infrastructure layer, we're deployed using Docker and Kubernetes.
So someone will ask, what are we using Rust for?
We're using it for a very small service. It's a server that wraps the syntax highlighting library. So we use it for syntax highlighting.
Cool. Yeah. All right. I'll go to the next question from email, which is, when will campaigns come out of private beta? Does it require anything special in addition to the standard deployment? All right, so campaigns, let me share my screen. Make it so you can make large scale changes to code. So think of, you got to fix something across 100 or 1,000 repos. And how do you do that? It's very painful now. You'd have to open up 100 or 1,000 PRs, or go file Jira issues or GitHub issues on people and hope that they do it. you'd have to, you know, open up a bunch of PRs. It's going to take forever. And Campaigns is a way to make that much easier. You tell Sourcegraph what change you'd like to make, and then it runs it across all the repositories and opens up hundreds or thousands of PRs and lets you monitor them. You can check this out here for more information. And it's an awesome feature. It's in private beta right now. And if you would like to use it, then you can go to that doc page and see how to opt in and then reach out to us. We would love to get it in your hands. I want to talk about some of the things that people are doing with it now that we've been really excited about. So one thing is upgrading dependencies and how those dependencies are used across a large amount of code. So, you know, if you, inside your company, you own some library that a bunch of other projects use, when you cut a new version, you know, it's really nice to not live in kind of back compat and deprecation hell. So you can run a campaign to go and upgrade all the other repos that are using your library, upgrade that version number in, you know, the package.json or whatever. And then also, if you've changed the API, you can go and rewrite calls in the client code automatically. Now, you know, you can put in, you know, a few hours of work and try to automate that. That's probably going to get most of the upgrades. You know, you might miss some very complex ways in which other people are using your library, but still, if you open up 100 PRs and 95% of them are good to go and 5% of them require a little bit of work, you still save so much time for everyone else at your company. And you as the maintainer, you have way less of a back compat and kind of deprecation hell world to live in. So that's one of the awesome things that we're seeing done with Campaigns. We're also working on making it so a lot of these tools that are really awesome that, you know, can perform some kind of static analysis on a single repo and maybe suggest fixes so that you can just run them in the background across all of your code to enforce rules like invariants. You say, you know, I never want this lint rule to ever be violated again. Now, if you would like to accomplish that, which a lot of people do, right now you could go and make that fail CI, but that's going to be super painful. It's going to mean that for this tiny little problem, which is like not a critical issue, everyone's work is going to be blocked. But with Campaigns, we want to give you the ability to create an invariant and say, I'm not going to stop everyone today from committing, but I'm not going to let any new violations of this be introduced. And then I'm going to make sure that there's on every single project a PR that is always up to date and maintained with fixes for all the violations of it. And if they get to it today, great. If they get to it, you know, and merge it in 2 weeks, great. But I am asymptotically approaching 100% satisfaction of this invariant. And that's what we want to let you do. There's no other kind of tool today that lets you do that. CI is too black and white. It's, you know, stop the world or not. If you put something in the editor, then, you know, that doesn't, people might see it while coding, but that doesn't have any kind of enforcement. So Campaigns and the ability to set invariants in them is a new kind of tool that we think every development team needs. It's, you know, there's a lot of work in getting this out. There's a lot of work in making this smooth across all the different code hosts and working with all the different static analysis tools, but we're seeing some awesome stuff, and we would love to get any folks interested in the private beta if you are a customer, or if not, then email us anyway, and you can you know, get Sourcegraph set up and start using it if you shoot us an email. All right. So I'll go to the next question from email. If anyone has another question, put that in Zoom chat. So let's see. Our security team will probably have concerns about who is accessing the code on Sourcegraph. How does code security and permissions work? All right, so yeah, code is one of the most sensitive assets inside of a company, and we get that. There's one thing that might seem obvious to some people here, but I just want to make that point. Sourcegraph is self-hosted. So that means it runs entirely on your own network. We think way more, you know, enterprise software, we think way more developer software should be self-hosted. And just to, you know, tell a brief story, initially, we built Sourcegraph and we made it so you could either use sourcegraph.com with all your private code, you just click that authorize button and, you know, give it access to your GitHub on the cloud, or you can run it self-hosted. We try to do both. And when we were just a small company getting started, no one trusted us with their code. And what people would tell us is, you know, well, like, I don't really trust, you know, this working on the cloud. So at the time, our self-hosted alternative was pretty nascent. And we got enough of that feedback that we just decided to go all in on self-hosted. So right now, all of our customers are running Sourcegraph self-hosted. We have no customer code on our servers whatsoever. So that's the main thing. And we have companies using Sourcegraph with tons and tons of code and tons of users that we've never spoken to. We have companies that, you know, you would recognize their name and you would say, wow, they are very conscious about security. And because they know that they can run Sourcegraph internally, they can lock it down, they can firewall it, they feel comfortable in doing that. So that's the key way that Sourcegraph keeps your code safe. We also do support integration with repository permissions. So making it so that when you go and search Sourcegraph, you or each user only sees results from the repos that you're allowed to see based on your own code host's permissions. We support that, and you know, that's a pretty important feature once you get a lot of code in there. All right. Well, we have a lot more questions from email, but I can save some of them for next time. So if anyone has any final questions for us, then we will stick around after we stop recording. Just put them in Zoom chat. Otherwise, thank you all for joining our first office hours. We are, you know, by day, very busy building universal code search, getting Sourcegraph out to a lot more developers, and it's awesome to connect and chat with folks here on Zoom as well. We will be doing more of these in the future, so look forward to seeing you all again. Thank you.